Now, guys, look, my only familiarity with lawyers is from the show Suits. Okay. Section 27 and by extension, Mr. West, are dramatic perhaps in a different sense. Dramatic in the opponents that they choose to go up against, the fights that they pick, dramatic in the number of lives that their work touches, the many thousands of lives that their work affects, and dramatic in the way that their lives are affected. Some of the work that they're engaged in targets some of the most vulnerable and important aspects of people's lives. So with that, I'm going to introduce Mr. West. So Mr. Johnson West is a candidate attorney at Section 27. His work focuses on advancing the right to education and access to healthcare. His main passion is working on climate justice and health. He has a master's from SCIS focusing on socio-demographic vulnerabilities of heat and health. So with that, guys, please join me and put your hands together to welcome Mr. Johnson.
Section 27, and the work we do is focused on vulnerable communities. It's kind of the only work we do. And so really what we aim to do. Lisa spoke about complexity, right? And obviously in the health system, I actually study public health systems in the masters. And it's all about complexity, right? Like whether we're using like WHO building blocks or whether we're using like more complex diagrams within the system to look at public health. Most of our systems in the world are complex. And someone speaking on climate change said something which really spoke to me, that said, complex problems require complicated solutions. And so at Section 27 we have this theory of change, which kind of tries to bring a complex solution to a complex problem. And what I really want, the main point, let's go through the whole thing. The main thing is, my favorite thing is people at the center. And I think as health practitioners, this is something you have to take into your work, is to put people at the center. Because if we don't put people at the center, then we have to start asking what are our intentions and what are we doing. And if you look at an organization like Operation Dudula, you have to start questioning, do they have people at the center or do they have themselves? Is it their own personal views at the center? And so what that also forces us to a space that serves the country. You have to leave your bias at the door and then advance access, advance human rights. And so that's why we put people at the center. And then just on the bottom, you can see we kind of engage in a lot of different methods. So like we are a legal organization, I am a lawyer, but a lot of our work is beyond that. Like we only litigate as a last resource. We only go to court at the last instance. Everything else building up to that is all about assistance. And it's kind of like, as a health practitioner, you can understand that. You only want to do like surgery as the last resort. Everything else you want to do preventative care, you want to do psychosocial support, you want to find a way to prevent the like massive cataclysmic engagement, right? You want to do everything before that. So that's why a lot of the work we do is kind of legal literacy, advocacy, research, and clienting. So when it comes to migrant health, this is kind of the map that half-heartedly put together regarding like what we do. So what I want you to focus on is we have two kind of splits. One is we help individuals, and the other is we look for systematic change, right? And so helping individuals is kind of like a client comes in and they've got an issue and we seek to assist them, right? Again, we don't want to litigate. So what we end up doing is we write letters to facilities. We say like, listen, this person has been denied care, or is being forced, or is being you guys know about patient classification? Okay, that's a good point, I'll get into that. But we'll say like a patient has been classified incorrectly, and we write a letter, and usually that works. Because as soon as you, as like a legal body, go to a health facility, and you say like, listen, we've got the law behind us, here's the law, you need to do your obligation, they have to help. They have to let that migrant, that foreign national through. Sometimes we send migrants to other NGOs, that's to get documentation. Documentation is one of the biggest barriers, legal barriers we face with access to healthcare. And then other sorts of support, we send them to psychosocial support. Sometimes there are issues, and you'll experience this just as much as we experience this, is vulnerable people need a voice, right? Sometimes all they want is to be heard. So we have clients coming in thinking they have a case, but they have nothing to fight. And all they're doing is they're sitting expressing their dilemmas. They're just saying, like, I suffer from this condition, it's terrible. When I go to the hospital, it's terrible. And there's no like legal mechanism for us to do anything, right? Like their story is just a story. And so as a health practitioner, you're going to encounter that a lot, right? Sometimes there's actually nothing you can do for this patient. And so I think what my sector has taught me and what hopefully your job to teach you is to develop that empathy, to develop a way of like listening to your patients in a way that sort of builds support, but then also the big thing is you have to put boundaries. You know, we can't be time to kind of pass that it is something like a poster. It indicates a so that's some of the systemic change and hopefully, and then we also engage with the states and other bodies, so that's through like, sort of we try to bring people into meetings, NECs, DDGs, like politicians, to bring them to meetings and say what's going on here. There's a massive food insecurity crisis in Eastern Cape, that's what we're doing, right? So we're not against the state, we don't hate the state. We work with them when we have to. Like we had politicians tell us, take us to court, because I'm apathetic and I can't do what we need to do, but I agree with you. So take us to court so that court can order my department to do this. So it's kind of like a back and forth relationship, and I would assume that as health practitioners, this is what you're going to have to work with, is you might be in a system that is corrupt. How do I then operate against it? How do I then find ways to bring justice? And when we talk about these 10 clients that we're facing every day, like, alhamdulillah, thank God, we have practitioners within these facilities who are willing to help us. We will say, like, send us the time to get them in the back door, we'll make sure they get what they need. And that's like life-saving treatment. And 2 weeks ago, we had this like healthcare discussion with rural Africa. There was all these like big shot doctors that came. And the one doctor stood up and like, bless her soul, she was trying her best, but she was like, I work in this practice in Rosebank and I really want to help, but like, I don't know how, and I'm receiving all this money and I don't know how to help. And like, it's like basically like white guilt, right? And what my response to that doctor is like, touch grass. Like, as a health practitioner, you don't have to go far to find big problems, but you don't have to do much to find someone who needs healthcare services. And so my advice to all of you is to find what speaks to you about like that need to service, and then find a way to like engage with people like us. Engage with Push. That sounds like a great initiative. Engage with these community-based NGOs and find a way to help, because there's so much help that can be done, but you have to be on the ground. You have to be on the ground. You can't be in your practice in those. Okay, we can skip through. Xenophobia. I don't know how much you guys are aware of xenophobia. I'll take us through a bit, but first of all, we have to understand the international context, right? The world is growing xenophobia. We're seeing these far-right movements growing. Trump's USA, we've got the UK is also pushing very anti-immigration policy. And you know, as we get closer to climate change, we're going to have more and more forced displacements, more migration. And so instead of like finding ways to adapt, instead of creating systems with complex systems which allow this change, we're getting scared and we're putting up walls and we're getting scared of the change. And a lot of it is economical. Yeah.
What do you think is the underlying cause of the shift towards the
right? That's a big question. Philosophically, I think what's happened is our left has become apathetic. Our left has become so engaged in like playing games of identity politics and the who's who and like not taking like a violent stance, whereas the right is taking a violent stance. Operation Dudula is willing to take a violent stance, but the left is not. The left has become like scared of their own ideas and is conflicting within itself, and so it doesn't want to stand up for what they believe is right. And that's why we have Kamala Harris, who was anti-Palestine for her election campaign and could have lost on like that little margin, could be marching up, but she wasn't able to take a proper stand against oppression. Is the solution, you know, even as a health practitioner, you can't just say this is what we're going to do and we're going to solve your life. Life is complicated, life is complex, there's no like golden arrow that solves everything.
Right, so what we then do is we want the systematic,
which is the operation division. It's both. But what we have to do now for Operation Dudula is find a systemic solution. What we're getting like 10 clients at least every day talking about access to clinics, or access to hospitals. And they're very hard stories. Our paralegals are the guys that on the team that take in the stories. And there's like, it's gut wrenching. It's life and death for a lot of people, a lot of children that have died, a lot of mothers that have died. And part of what we're doing to get the systemic change is to get all these stories, draft protocol affidavits is like documents take to the courts. It's like under oath, this is my experience. And like obviously a lot of these migrants don't speak English, so we draft these affidavits and we get their testimonies and we try to take this forth, right? That's part of the process. And so you have to like kind of engage with the stories, and what you realize is the apathy, the feeling of defeat that these migrants are facing. So when this all started kind of June, July, right? It was Operation Dudula, making a harass, making a noise outside the clinic, like 5 men, 10 men, shouting, screaming. I heard of a case recently where there were 10 migrants that went, and there was one community member. One community member said, "You can't come in." And these migrants turned away. That's apathy. That's the feeling of I can't fight for myself. That's like the system doesn't care for me. Like they could easily just push past that one person and run. There's no like that's not a real barrier. The barrier that's existing is one in their head and hearts, right? That feeling of like I'm not worth the system. And our laws say you are, right? And we'll get into that. But the law is fully protecting these people. But what operation to do that and march to march? And it's gone beyond, as I just said, now it's community members. Operation to do that march to march have done their job. They don't need to do anything because they've instilled this idea that xenophobia is justice. And through that, we now have migrants who are completely apathetic and therefore suffering because of it and going through all of these health challenges.
And so one of the systemic changes that we came up with
last year is we took the MEC for Health in Gauteng to court, and we said the Constitution allows full access to full health services for free for maternal and lactating mothers and children under the age of 6. And what was happening was facilities were saying like, sorry, no, you have to pay something, right? Now we'll get into that situation. But the court went so far, because the court can't change the law is clear. So now the question that has to sit with the court is what do they do to ensure the judge can't come every time there's a maternal lactating or child, right? The judge doesn't have that power, concept of security. So what the judge ordered, which, the government was very opposed to this separation of powers, whatever. They said you have to put up posters. And so all of these public health facilities had to put up these posters, which just said healthcare services for maternal lactating children under the age of 6 is for free. And just that little thing empowers the migrant, right? Empowers someone who is dependent because it's it's right next. This person denying me care is going against this sign right next to it. And sometimes it's little changes as small as that can infiltrate the complex system and get things moving. As we know, my advice to all of you is to find what speaks to you about that need to service, and then find a way to engage with people like us. Engage with Push. That sounds like a great initiative. Engage with these community-based NGOs and find a way to help people. There's so much help that can be done, but you have to be on the block. You have to be on the block. You can't be in your practice and wisdom. Okay, we can skip through. Xenophobia. I don't know how much you guys are aware of xenophobia. I'll take us through a bit, but first of all, we have to understand the international context, right? The world is growing xenophobia. We're seeing these far right movements growing. Trump's USA, we've got the UK is also pushing very anti-immigration policy. And as we get closer to climate change, we're going to have more and more forced displacements, more migration. And so instead of finding ways to adapt, instead of creating systems with complex systems which allow this change, we're getting scared and we're putting up walls and we're getting scared of the change. And a lot of it is economical. Yeah.
Do you think is the underlying cause of the shift towards the right?
Right. That's a big question. Philosophically, I think what's happened is our left has become apathetic. Our left has become so engaged in playing games of identity politics and the who's who and like not taking like a violent stance, whereas the right is taking a violent stance. Operation Dudula is willing to take a violent stance, but the left is not. The left has become like scared of their own ideas and is conflicting within itself, and so it doesn't want to stand up for what they believe is right. And that's why we have Kamala Harris, who was anti-Palestine for her election campaign and could have lost on that, like that little margin could be much less, but she wasn't able to take a proper stand against the president. Here's the solution, you know, even as a health practitioner, you can't just say this is what we're going to do, we're going to solve your life. Life is complicated, life is complex, there's no like golden arrow that solves everything.
Right, so what we then do is we move on to the systematic,
which is the operation degree. Or it's both. But what we have to do now for Operation Dudula is find a systemic solution. Because what we're getting like 10 clients at least every day talking about access to clinics or access to hospitals. And they're very hard stories. Our paralegals are guys that are the team that take in the stories. And there's like, it's gut wrenching. It's life or death for a lot of people. We know a lot of children that have died, a lot of mothers that have died. And you know, part of what we're doing to get the systemic change is to get all these stories draft what are called affidavits. Affidavits is like a document to take to the courts. It's like under oath, this is my experience. And like obviously a lot of these migrants don't speak English, so we draft these affidavits and we get their testimonies and we try to take it to court, right? That's how the process. And yeah, so you have to like kind of engage with these stories, and what you realize is the apathy, the feeling of defeat that these migrants are facing. And so when this all started kind of June, July, right? It was Operation Dudula, making a kharas, making a noise outside a clinic, like 5 men, 10 men, shouting, screaming. I heard of a case recently where there were 10 migrants that went, and there was one community member. One community member said, "You can't come in." And these migrants turned away. That's apathy. That's the feeling of I can't fight for myself. That's like the system doesn't care for me. Like they could easily have just pushed past that one person and gone. You know, there's no like that's not a real barrier. The barrier that's existing is one in their head and hearts, right? That feeling of like I'm not worth the system. And our laws say you are, right? And we'll get into that. But the law is fully protecting these people. But what Operation Dudula and March to March, and it's gone beyond, as I just said, now it's community members. Operation Dudula and March to March have done their job. They don't need to do anything because there is still this idea that xenophobia is justice. And through that, we now have migrants who are completely apathetic and therefore suffering because of it and going through all of these health challenges.
and so yeah, one of the systemic changes that we came up with
last year is we took the MEC for Health in Gauteng to court, and we said the Constitution allows full access to full health services for free for maternal and lactating mothers and children under the age of 6. And what was happening was facilities were saying like, sorry, no, you have to pay us something right now, I'll get into that situation. But the court went so far, because the court can't change the law is clear. So now the question that has to sit with the court is what do they do to ensure the judge can't come every time there's a maternal lactating child. Like the judge doesn't have that power, concept security. So what the judge ordered, which I mean the government was very like opposed to this like separation of powers or whatever. They said like you have to oppose this. And so all of these public health facilities had to put up these posters which just said healthcare services for maternal lactating children under the age of 6 is for free. And just that little thing empowers the migrant, right? Empowers someone who makes the clinic because it's here, it's right next. This person denying you care is going against this sign right next to it. And sometimes it's little changes as small as that can infiltrate the complex system and get things. We are now, since last year's election, we are sort of on like a slower, it's not like as steep, but we are on like an upward spike. And warriors, if the gradient is flatter, it becomes harder, it's not going to dip, right? It's going to stay more consistent, so that's a good concern.
human rights violations, obviously, work that I do, see that on every day. And then again, it's this,
where's the Ubuntu, right? If we're othering everyone, where does it stop? And whether it's race, class, gender, whatever it is, we are killing Ubuntu with xenophobic ideas, right? And then obviously vigilantes will sort of come up on the poll. You get these vigilante groups that decide, I'm going to take justice into my own hands. And then this final question is like, we call Africans foreign nationals and immigrants, but we don't call white Cape Town European tourists coming as e-nomads foreign nationals. No one does a xenophobic attack outside Starbucks. Like, we allow that, and then, so what is the labeling? Who are we up against, right? And that's the whole thing that we have to address. Xenophobia is made up. There's no real justice. If there was real justice, Operation Dudula would be outside Starbucks and Cape Town. Operation Dudula would be seeking to make systemic change, right? They'd be at the border, actually creating proper immigration structures, right? But they're not. They're going to the vulnerable, they're going to clinics in vulnerable communities. They're fighting the poor, they're fighting the disadvantaged, they're fighting like literally the people who can get is who they're fighting, or children at school. It's like, who is the enemy, right? Do you want to say it? Yeah, exactly. You can go to the next slide. Cool. So before I get into this, I want to discuss who Operation Dudula is. I saw like there's a bit of concern over confusion. So Operation Dudula is like, they registered as like, I think it's like an NGO. So they are registered, they're an official organization. They don't have like a lien, right? Like they're basically registered as an organization so that they can organize more formally in terms of protests and stuff. So it's hard to find like an Operation Dudula manifesto.
But if you look at the work they've been doing since they've officially registered, it's all just anti-immigration. Like that's their main purpose, right? And it got to a point where a partner of ours, Sarah, I don't think I know Sarah. Sarah does like property rights, and they took them to court. So they took Operation Dudula, they took some ministers, and they took SAPS, South African Police Service, to court. And it was a very strong intervention. I was in the court on the day. Their arguments were very well played. They basically just said like, this organization is operating outside the law. They were very intentional about the laws that they chose to catch them on, and also to catch SAPS on, because SAPS was failing their obligation. The thing that they caught SAPS on is, SAPS has an obligation. It is illegal to dress as a military personnel in protest. I don't know if you know what operations do when they dress like military, right? And I've never heard of operations where they get arrested because they look like that. So that's how they got them. And the state's argument against that, SAP's argument is very weak, and said like, if I wear a camo cap, does that mean I can be arrested, right? What happened in that court case, we learned now, don't just throw yourself at everything. Sometimes you have to say like, no, I can't help being like full my cup, let me look after myself and then get back out there, because burnout for you is real, burnout for us is real. When you are in a service sector, like a sector that's helping others, you have to be intentional and check that intention. As health practitioners and lawyers, the drama comes in, the flair comes in, the ego talks, and it wants you to get out there, it wants you to do these things because it makes you look good. And so it's another thing of the left, right? The left began presenting itself and performing as an assistant that was creating only a systemic change. So intentionality. So yeah. Cool, and then so the roots of xenophobia in South Africa isn't apartheid. It's not the understanding, right? Apartheid taught us how to other on the basis of whatever race, but also gender, but also class, but also everything, right? And then that othering is like, you want to talk about the root causes of our like biases and prejudices. It's the othering. It's the seeing someone as something different, religious, racial, class, whatever it is the othering. And South Africa taught us how to do that well. We still do it, but we do it mainly based on like class in South Africa. And that's become our biggest, that's why they say apartheid was privatized, right? It's because we created an othering that's different to what we used to. And yeah, so that's where xenophobia starts. And I always say like, who is the enemy, right? The enemy is not Operation Dudula. The enemy is that thing in your heart which has bias, that thing that looks at the other and goes, oh no, they're different. However you do it, like whether you do it to someone like Trump, who's like by all means a bigot
and a terrible person, like how much am I othering Trump to make him an enemy? And someone once told me like, fascists wear boots, and fascists can also wear high heels. And never get it mistaken with that. Some people on the left are so attached to their idea of right and wrong that they become fascists. They're willing to fight anyone that looks any different to their values, what they believe people should look at. And so as I'll bring it back again, as health practitioners, your biggest job in the chaos, in the everyday, the bustle, the death, the tragedy, is to not other people. And there's a book, I'll maybe give it to you as a resource to spread. There's a book which speaks about how there's a demographic called the Hmong, HW Hmong, which is a demographic in America, and how their access to healthcare services in America, like how doctors suddenly have to learn about a whole new culture in order to service patients. And if you don't do that, people will die. Right? And so that's what we do with migrants. We other them, another culture, and we let them die. And then the manifestations of xenophobia, student politics is massive, far-right movements, it's huge. We see it in healthcare workers. One of our biggest barriers is not actually facilities, but an individual nurse that just tells a migrant to like, therefore. And then we see it in friends and family, right? And more importantly, we see it in ourselves. Like maybe it's not xenophobic, but it's the other. And so it's important to recognize when we see it.
Okay, so the concerns of xenophobia.
We're told that it affects like first world countries more, but I'm seeing it a lot in my work, but we don't have the data. So it's very interesting to have this come up in this conversation. But I'm just like wondering with the WHO, because they wanted to specifically find out what was happening with migrants. We don't have the data thing, are they taking accountability for like the full system, or are they just saying we don't need to have data for undocumented people, do something?
It's the full system. So like sitting in this room of the system review, and then probably the most important factor in this whole thing is Stats SA. The Stats SA has to be capacitated to start collecting data and start like analyzing it. So there's a whole system. Again, when something happens from it, there's yet to be seen. With NHI on the horizon, if we do not have like quick, smart, bureaucratic systems of tracking patients, we are not. Yeah, we are going to wish for how. Just on this point, does anyone know who funds Operation Dudula? No one. In fact, no one really knows, and a lot of people believe that. So, they are funded by like what not they're funded by these cultural groups that want to see division, that want to see chaos because they thrive with it, right? And so I mean that's an interesting point. It's like the power and money that's at play in all of the systems, in like political parties and in Operation Dudula, is still controlled by the same people. And that's why it was slightly rather than a concept, right? Because he still had interests with the white market capital. What we need to recognize is that sometimes the system has to go down before it can go back up. But what we currently is not sustainable. The inequality is only getting worse, and eventually it will crack. And so sometimes we do need things to get worse. And that's why I like this narrative of things are better in apartheid. It's so stupid because it's like, but we have like more like the potential for good now. It's way better than it ever was in apartheid, right? And we have to focus on that. Policy gaps. So like the policies are not the problem. Some of the biggest growth that we face is like policies are actually good. So like best like constitution, we're military caps, and they're backing down. That's a problem, right? Like, and it's not just a problem. Like maybe those subs guys are not biased, maybe they don't have prejudice. Maybe they do, but maybe like they just also scared and they don't know how to like act within their legal framework. And then Operation Dudula says this is the law, and the subs are like, shit, do you know the law? So like this is some of the problems. This is part of the complex systems. Like even if we do get subs, we get them to enforce it. So Aaron says, be very careful. It's a very apathetic threat. The Sutu starts telling their own country, stop being beggars for South African stock resources. which is crazy, right? Like how can you hold that opinion? And the reason they're able to hold it is because like we spread this misinformation, and the suits is probably going shit, and their poor healthcare system is suffering, but it's not. It's nothing to do with the people from the city, right?
The portfolio health committee said
You're only entitled to emergency healthcare services, which is wrong. And this is someone who operates like deeply within the law. Aaron operates sometimes above the law, right? But a portfolio healthcare committee needs to know the legislation and complete ignorance to the reality of legislation, right? And then you read that, and then you think like, oh, he's not anti-immigration because he's saying what they're legally entitled to. So you believe it. You think like, oh, the law only entitles access to EMS, which it doesn't. Hannah's challenge is creeping across again. It's like this challenge of like data, which the Department of Health is so heavily relying on. And it's like, the problem is you. You need to create a system which enables us. We've been saying it for years, digitize the whole healthcare system. It hasn't happened. It's like bare steps to make it happen. So I don't know if you guys saw, but the Mayor of Johannesburg said we need to digitize brains. So it's coming soon. Digitize brains. So we just need SAPs on the ground, having a no-nonsense stance on these like vigilantes and doing what the law requires them to do. And we need facilities reporting this because we do have facilities we like enjoy it, right? Like they think if all these migrants get prevented access, let's work for me. Good day. Like they might not even be xenophobic, they're just tired, right? And like so we need facilities to undertake the obligation to call the police and to say this is an issue. And we all need to stand up against like fear vigilantism. We need to stand up for what's right, and we need to be like advocates for access to health regardless, right? Because that's what you get to do. You get to promote access to health, to ideology, and you do it regardless, right? Regardless of whatever you believe in. Data collection, as I said, data is essential. It's again, the government has to improve their systems. They know it's a problem. I don't know what intervention you can do. Yeah, and then like this cultural competency training, we face it with the